Joining us live is the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Angus, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. New data out this morning forecasts some 56,000 businesses to be hit with, quote, industrial mayhem. How did you come to that figure?
Well, that's just the number of businesses that there are between 20 and 200 who are likely to be affected. So that's across areas like construction, manufacturing, accommodation and food, restaurants and cafes and so on, professional services, the smaller accountants and lawyers. So all of these businesses are ones that will fall within the ambit of this legislation. And of course, you know, this is at exactly the time when the Labor Party should be focusing, the government should be focusing on the cost of living pressures Australians are facing. It's aiming to give a Christmas present to union officials. Right. And this is the exact opposite of what we need, Pete. We need a focus on those very real issues people are facing now, not reunionising workforces. Look, we're seeing strong wages growth at the moment, but the strongest areas of wages growth are in the private sector businesses where there's individual agreements. And that's exactly what they want to move away from in these small businesses that I've talked about.
OK, so if the minimum employee threshold was raised from 15 to 200 employees, would you then support the bill?
No, we're not saying that. I mean, there's a lot more to it than this, but the point here is that you've got 56,000 businesses that are not used to negotiating with unions, that mostly won't have HR departments, that mostly won't have the experience and expertise to deal with experienced union officials who are trying to reunionise their workforce and move away from that employer-employee relationship that drives productivity and delivers good outcomes for both employer and employee. You know, that's what they're proposing to move away from. This is a problem beyond just that sector, but this is the sector where I think it's going to be the hardest hit. And that's where we're deeply concerned about the sort of impacts that we might see.
Right, I mean, but that's a big business. If you've got 150, 160, 170 staff members, I mean, surely you would have HR systems and the like in place.
Well, I mean, different ones will have different arrangements, obviously, but there'll be a lot in that group, that 56,000, who won't be sophisticated and certainly won't have dealt with unions who have the capacity then to drive industry-wide strikes and disputes. And that's a whole new world for them, and a world which is not necessary at a time when we're seeing very rapid wage gains. Look, Pete, if you just get out and talk to small businesses, and it seems to me that lots of these Labor politicians are not doing this, you'll see that they are having to provide higher wages, better conditions in order to attract and retain staff. That's what they're doing now, and they do it in a way which works for them, works for their employees, and we're seeing that come through in the data. This is not about that. This is about reunionisation and jobs for union officials, and that's what's so disappointing about it.
A Senate inquiry is to be handed down today. Is there any way that you would be satisfied the Fair Work Commission will be able to handle arbitration powers to stop strikes?
Look, you know, it remains to be seen how this all plays out, Pete, but we're deeply concerned about what this will mean for strikes, and there's no question about that. You know, I lived through the 70s and 80s and watched those industrial disputes during that time period, and those industry-wide disputes were brutal on many occasions, and ultimately didn't solve the problems they were aiming to solve. In fact, time and time again, they were really about the union officials, not about the employees, and that's why we are against this legislation. It's why we see it as unhelpful.
In its entirety.
We see it as taking the country in exactly the wrong direction at a time when we need employers and employees working closely together to find the sorts of gains that are good for both.
Right, so there's no way that you will support this legislation in its entirety?
Well, we haven't seen a version of it that we can support. That's very clear. You know, we obviously want to see a focus on enterprise bargaining. Everything I've said suggests that, Pete. But we certainly haven't seen a form of this legislation.
What if it was sectioned off?
Well, you know, again, I haven't seen that. I'm not going to speculate on all sorts of hypotheticals. What's clear is Labor wants multi-enterprise bargaining. There's no ambiguity about that. Tony Burke hasn't minced words on that. He wants to give more power to union officials. That's his goal, and he has to pay back what the union officials did for them during the election campaign. That's the deal. This is a broken election promise, by the way. They didn't say they were going to do this, but this is where they're going. I don't think there's any suggestion that there's any alternative on the table.
Right. So how do you get wages moving if it's not this bill?
Well, we're seeing them moving in the market. This is the point. If you look at the latest WPI data, you've seen individual agreements in the private sector growing faster than any other part of the economy. This is private sector, employers and employees coming to arrangements that are good for both. We're seeing it at a really rapid pace, Pete, and that's a good thing. We want to see those sensible arrangements being put in place. This is in individual agreements, by the way, not even in enterprise agreements. This is where we're seeing the real strength in wages growth, which is exactly at odds with Labor's whole narrative here. Why? Why is it that they are saying we need to reunionise or unionise these businesses at exactly at the time when these businesses are passing through the fastest pay rises in the economy? Well, I think it's simply about payback to union officials and making sure that those union officials have job security. That's what this is really about.
All right, that's the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor. Appreciate it, Angus. We'll talk to you again soon.